It is not characteristic of me to cover some topic in any way but a thorough way, but in the subject of Judaism of the intertestamental period in the New Testament, the nature of the case is that we have to be brief. I'm going to end tonight looking at the subject of Judaism. I'm going to end our study at the end of tonight with a text that will show that we've only done what the Lord himself did in dealing with Judaism in a brief fashion. We've only really done two things. I've given you last week an overview of Judaism from Matthew's Gospel. The reason I picked Matthew's Gospel, or let's start earlier than that, the reason I picked a Gospel rather than some other portion of the New Testament was because the Gospels present the situation during which we are confronted most openly with the subject of Judaism, and therefore the importance of our knowing something about it. You won't find that as heavily later in the New Testament as you do in the Gospels. The reason we selected Matthew was Matthew is the most Jewish of the Gospels, and due to the audience to which he's writing, obviously he would have more to say about it, or it would come up more often in his discussion. And then prior to that, we just looked at an introductory study. So we've really only done two studies thus far on Judaism. And what I said I would do tonight would be to go back to last week's study in the Gospel of Matthew, where we found at least one example per chapter of the intersection of Matthew with Judaism, or Judaism with Matthew. You could find a lot more, and we'll see that to be the case tonight. But I said I'd come back and pick a couple of examples and deal more in detail with them. So the first one, if you'll turn, will be in Matthew then, obviously. Among other places, I think for the second one we'll look at Mark first, since Mark gives it to us the way we need it. But for the first case, I want to deal with the subject of Galilee, with the place of Galilee, the region of Galilee. Matthew 2, verses 19 through 23. We'll start here, and then we'll be over in chapter 4. Now, the reason why it would be important to know something about Judaism is because only in studying the intertestamental period history and the transition period this is, how events change from the old to the new, can be seen in the fact that Jesus spent a lot of his life ministering in Galilee, and Galilee is simply not found in the Old Testament. Geographically, the Palestine of the New Testament is an entirely different Palestine than the Palestine of the Old. Gone are the 12 tribal divisions around which much of the early history of Israel revolves and upon which that history is dependent, especially the time of Joshua and his successors and the reorganization of the land under the 12 tribes of Israel. You don't have any tribal divisions. Goner talks about Gad and Manasseh and all of this. Not only that, but gone are the nations, the two divisions of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And what do we have in their place? Well, it's a well-known fact, but sometimes there's an unconscious changing of gears as we go from the old to the new. Although we know what's there, we don't think about maybe some of the consequences or maybe some of the whys. What's in its place? Obviously, Galilee to the north, Samaria in the middle, and Judea to the south. You have three divisions in Palestine, politically, regionally, geographically now, that you don't have or you don't find in the Old Testament. Now, to be sure, that the bare term Galilee appears a couple of times in the Old Testament, but in all of the places except one, which is going to be a prophecy of the Messiah, there really have no consequence at all. I think you've got two in Joshua and one each in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Kings, and Isaiah. And Isaiah is the only one of any consequence. The other just speak of places, place names, geographical names, such as Kadesh in Galilee. So the word appears, but there's nothing really of any significance or importance concerning Galilee in the Old Testament. But we know from Sunday school how important it is in the New. So what I'm saying is something has happened meanwhile. So we're again back to those mysterious centuries between Malachi and Matthew. That if we don't know something about them, then we open the New Testament off balance, unless you've been to Sunday school. But then all you know is just the New Testament. You don't know why things have changed, maybe even what has changed, and I think explanations and background material is lacking. When Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. The angel said, "Arise and take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life." I think in the providence of God, the early years of the child Jesus with his mother and father in their flight to Egypt and their return home is directly patterned on the man Moses and his experience. Do you not recall how Moses had to flee Egypt due to various circumstances in Exodus chapter 2, and it was not until 40 years later that he returned. And I think maybe even more analogous than that simple relationship is the fact that very explicitly in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 19, God tells Moses, "The men, or they, which sought your life are now dead." That's the exact same thing that the angel tells to Joseph. Now, of course, the direction of travel has been swapped around. Moses went out of Egypt more or less into Palestine, and Jesus went out of Palestine into Egypt. There's a reversal. God means something there, or he would have the events the same and the language the same, down to almost the very words. For they are dead which sought the young child's life. Exodus 4:19, for they are dead which sought thy life. So you could study that or think about that on your own. He's intending to imply something there. He arose and took the young child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. But when he had heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea, and we've already studied the reigns of Herod and his various sons that he had, one of those being Archelaus, and I remember we had a good study on Matthew 2:22. Evidently, they are headed back into Judea, maybe to put down roots there. Now, they're not from Judea, to be sure. You have to go over to Luke chapter 2. In Luke's account, he lets us know immediately that Joseph and Mary hail from the part of Israel known as Galilee, and more specifically from the city known as Nazareth. And there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that you had to return to your birthplace to be enrolled. And so they went to Bethlehem, which again is in all the providential control of God. God's working in the government houses back in Rome to have Caesar Augustus issue this decree so that Joseph and Mary, who's carrying the child Jesus, can be in Bethlehem when the child is born. They don't have all of that figured out themselves, so that prophecy can be fulfilled. Micah 5:2. Now, she knew she was carrying God's son, but to put it all together and know when to be where, that was handled way back in Rome. And it got them, it moved around the whole world, but it got them in the right place at the right time so prophecy could be fulfilled, which shows the awesome sovereignty of God. Amen. Even when Mary and Joseph know what's going on as far as the child in her womb, to think now, all right, now Micah 5:2 says the prophet, the Messiah, has to be born in Bethlehem. So we've somehow got to get down there and get a place rented real quickly so that the child can be born. They're not thinking like that at all. We don't know what's going through their mind. But evidently they wouldn't have been in Bethlehem if God had not worked things out through the government in Rome. But Herod is not a good one. Herod is the one after Jesus. And so they naturally suspect that Archelaus, his son, would be of the same evil disposition. So when he heard that, and so another prophecy can be fulfilled, as we'll see when we get to the end of this chapter. When he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither, notwithstanding being warned of God in a dream for the fourth time. Dreams become important in Matthew 2. He turned aside into the parts of Galilee. Now, of course, the critical historians will say Matthew is out of sync with Luke, because Matthew implies that, up to Galilee was an afterthought because they had no knowledge of Galilee, where Luke tells us they were from Galilee. So why are they going to Judea? Well, they had become accustomed to Bethlehem. They had stayed there a while, evidently after the child's birth, probably for over a year. They had no need, they had no desire to go back to Nazareth, and they stayed there. But that's another subject as well. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he should be called a Nazarene. So we're introduced to Galilee and to the city of importance there for the boyhood of Jesus, Nazareth, very early in Matthew's account. We're going to find it again over in Matthew chapter 4, verse 12. Now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee, meaning he's ministering in Judea at that time. Well, like I said, we've got a different situation with the territorial boundaries in Palestine facing us when we open the pages of the New Testament. Gone are the 12 tribal divisions, gone are the 2 kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and in their place we have this threefold division of Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. We have already discussed Samaria and its relationship to events in the New Testament and its importance, so that we would have to know some type of ITP developmental background. We'll come to Judea whenever we study some about the temple, the priesthood, the events that are going on there in Jerusalem. So here are a few words on Galilee. Galilee was not liked at all by the rabbis, especially the northern part of the region, which they derisively and pejoratively nicknamed Galilee of the Gentiles. And it even has this name in Scripture, because that was its popular designation. Same chapter, Matthew 4, the 15th verse. We're going to read that section here in just a moment. Now, you get some of this information from the New Testament, but most of it you have to get just from Jewish studies themselves, which again goes a long way to show how interesting this topic can be, but how never-ending it can be also. But the rabbis don't like Galilee at all. So it is interesting, and it does say something about the character of God and His plans and purposes, that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, because of the reign of Archelaus, do not settle in Judea, which they could easily have done in Jerusalem or Bethlehem or Hebron or Beersheba or somewhere to the south, but they are led very specifically up to the north. They're led back up to where Mary and Joseph are from, Galilee, and back to their hometown by living experience, Nazareth. The rabbis had many negative things to say about Galilee. I jotted down a couple of these. They're of enough importance you may want to note these. They said, Judea is grain, Galilee is straw, and beyond Jordan is chaff. Now, beyond Jordan would not necessarily be to the east. Beyond Jordan could also be to the north, the northern reaches of Galilee, as we will see in this Matthew 4 passage, I think, here in just a moment. Judea is grain. This was a popular saying of the rabbis. Galilee, straw. And beyond Jordan is chaff. The rabbis also said this, if one wishes to be rich, let him go north. If one wants to be wise, let him come south. Notice the verbs go and come. That must be spoken from a Judean point of view. If one wishes to be rich, in other words, the Gentiles knew how to make the money, and the money was up north. If one wishes to be rich, and an apostate, of course, they mean, let him go north, that is, to Galilee. It's a very, very pejorative reference to the northern province of Galilee. If he wants to be wise, let him come south. Obviously spoken from a Judean point of reference. Well, let's look at this passage in Matthew 4. Now, when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, then he departed into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, now it doesn't mean that Nazareth isn't in Galilee. Matthew wouldn't be that confused, but Nazareth does not become the base of Jesus, but rather Capernaum, which later becomes the city of Peter, which also becomes known as the town of Jesus, his town. Leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the sea coast, Sea of Galilee, not Mediterranean, in the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali. Now, of course, that's Old Testament reference there. There are no borders of Zebulun and Naphtali anymore. which means you'd have to know something about the 12 tribal divisions. That it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan. Judea is grain, Galilee is straw, beyond Jordan is chaff. Beyond doesn't necessarily mean, as you might think, on the opposite side, east-west. It could mean north-south, and it does here. By the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, that is, up above the Sea of Galilee. Now, really, the Jordan River has its a source even further north than that. But you generally think of the Sea of Galilee as the source of the Jordan River because it starts flowing out the southern end. By the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, and here's that rabbinical designation, Galilee of the Gentiles. Galilee. Now, it was based on something in the Old Testament, but the rabbis meant something specifically by that. Galilee of the Gentiles. The people which sat in darkness saw great light, and to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, light is sprung up. Now, he's quoting, if you'll turn back to Isaiah 9, and if you'll also find a map in the back of your Bible. I didn't bring any of mine along. A map of Palestine, Israel, in the 1st century A.D., something about the time of Jesus. So you can, because not all of you are as familiar as some of you might be with these places, so you can find Galilee, find Nazareth, which is in southern Galilee, find Capernaum, which is up in northern Galilee, and notice all of that in relation to Judea, the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan River. We'll go to Isaiah 9 first. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Now that concerns the Assyrian invasion. Remember, when they came into the north, they would come into the furthest north first. And that is where Zebulun and Naphtali, those ancient tribal divisions, happen to have been found. So that was the light affliction. And afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, Galilee of the nations. Galilee of the nations. Now, Galilee is part of Israel proper. There's no question about that. But still, the Old Testament refers to it as Galilee of the nations, and the rabbis use that as the Galilee of the Gentiles all the time. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death. You see, the Assyrian leaders just overran the area here. This is where the slaughter took place in the several invasions prior to the actual fall of the northern capital of Israel and Samaria. So certainly it is the land of the shadow of death, because the inhabitants could easily recall the inroads made by the Assyrians earlier. Upon them hath the light shined. Now, all of that certainly couldn't be fulfilled in Isaiah's time. Some of that has to wait. The spiritual part, the light part, they had experienced the death and the shadow of death and the light and heavy affliction in earlier years, but the revelation and the spiritual part awaits the fulfillment of this prophecy in the ministry of Jesus in Matthew chapter 4. So why do the rabbis have such an attitude toward Galilee? Well, both of these passages should alert us to the answer to that, and that is its close proximity to Gentiles. Its close proximity to Gentiles. Judea, with its great spiritual headquarters of Jerusalem, is a long way off. And you must recall some of our earlier studies in the political backgrounds to the period between the Testaments, that Judea had forcibly circumcised the Edomites back in the 2nd century B.C. under John Hyrcanus, had forcibly circumcised the Edomites to the south as well as to the east across the Jordan River, which would therefore serve as buffers against Gentile defilement. Now, if you've got your map and you're not familiar with these things, then you can follow along on your map as well as writing. Judea has itself safe because In earlier years, they had forcibly circumcised the Edomites to the south as well as to the east, which would then serve as buffers against Gentile defilement. Galilee is so far off from Jerusalem, which is where all truth and light and revelation would be as far as the rabbis are concerned, which would be the place to live if you're an Orthodox Jew. And not only that, it's separated from Jerusalem and Judea by that middle section known as Samaria. We've already studied what the rabbis thought about Samaria and the Jews in general. And furthermore, not only is it far away and it's separated by Samaria, it's way up close to all those Gentiles, those Phoenicians in Tyre and Sidon. Great ancient opponents of Israel, by the way, in the Old Testament. That evidently is why the rabbis picked up such a negative attitude toward the region of Galilee. Its close proximity to the Gentiles. Isaiah even calls it Galilee of the nations. Why Galilee? You would never say Judea of the nations. That'd be Judea the nation, one. But Galilee's just far enough away from Jerusalem to have some defilement by Gentile contact. You've got Tyre and Sidon. You've got Damascus not that far away. You've got Antioch not that far away, which is one of the three largest, most populous cities in the Roman Empire of that day. Rome, Antioch on the Orontes, and Alexandria, Egypt. So the rabbis are very, very suspicious of Galilee. So one thing that we could get from this spiritually or personally here tonight, besides just looking at a historical study, is the fact that our Lord chose this place as the place of his ministry. He spent most of his time here. It was a despised area that was under the suspicious watch of religious hierarchy and authority down in Jerusalem. The people may not be as orthodox as the rabbis would like them to be in Galilee. They're too far away. They're separated, as I said before. And thirdly, they're too close to places like Tyre and Sidon, from which hail that infamous queen of the Old Testament, Jezebel. She was a Phoenician from Tyre and Sidon area. Married a Jewish king and brought Baalism, the worship of Baal, into Israel, the god of the Phoenicians. Now, perhaps because of the Galileans' contacts with heathendom, they chose to reject much of the rabbinical oral teaching. So there's no wonder that no love was lost, the thoughts of the rabbis. Now, I find this situation, by the way, to be analogous to what we discussed in the book of Acts with God using the Hellenists to spread the word. They had just enough contact with other thoughts and points of view. Not to give up their faith in God, in the Old Testament, Mosaic law, and so forth, but to know that there were other approaches. Other people had other thoughts about it. Now, I never intend that to imply that that's good and healthy, because then, you just become a latitudinarian and you'll accept anything. But God needed to have that happen with the Hellenistai so that when the full revelation of just what the church was all about and what their mission was to encompass, whenever that came to them, they were the ones willing to accept that, as we've seen earlier, not the apostles. They had just enough contact, not to have surrendered their faith, but to be the ones open enough that God could use. I find the same thing true with the Galileans here. Not that they're giving up their faith or their belief in God. I mean, whenever Jesus comes across people like Peter and Andrew, who are from Bethsaida, and then they make their, I said Andrew, and some of the other apostles, not all of them, but Bethsaida was their home, and they make Capernaum their home later on. When he comes across these men, these aren't apostates. They know the law. They're good religious people. They probably make their trips down to Jerusalem. But they've had just enough contact with Gentiles, with heathendom, that they're going to be in the place so that they're willing to receive the fulfillments of messianic prophecy in the man Jesus of Nazareth. That's what I'm saying. Whereas the people down south are not willing to accept that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Very similar to the Hellenist question there. The Hellenists were Orthodox. We went over and over and over on that. There's no proof of the fact that they were anything but Orthodox, regardless of where they were, Alexandria to Rome. But I trust you can see that, if you're not right there at headquarters hearing that Jewish point of view all the time, if you're not right there, you're out somewhere else. You have the tendency to hear other points of view, and not that any of them gave into that, but it was just enough of a persuasion that God could break them from the narrow traditional biases that the Jews had back in Jerusalem, which were false in the long run. And this same thing is going to be true of the Galileans. So they chose to reject much of the rabbinical oral teaching. Now notice I didn't say they chose to reject the Old Testament law. They couldn't do that and be a Jew. They never do that. But they chose to reject, because of their contact with heathendom, much of the rabbinical oral teaching that goes by the New Testament name, the tradition of the elders. That's a technical phrase. We sometimes talk about tradition, good old religious tradition. We don't mean it in any technical sense, although we mean basically the same thing as Jesus meant whenever he used the term of religious tradition in his day. But it was a technical term that spoke of rabbinical oral teaching and laws, case decisions, and rabbinical courts of law and so forth. They chose to reject much of that. Where did Jesus spend most of his earthly ministry? Jerusalem? No. But in Galilee. The whole thrust of his ministry is in Galilee until the last weeks of his ministry. And he makes his final pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now I say final because there had been excursions there on several occasions earlier, notably around the times of the feasts, when he knew that he could have a large audience of people, and not only a large audience, but a large audience of people that would not necessarily be from Judea and Jerusalem. So let's ask the question. We're giving you a lot of information to think about tonight. Why Galilee? Why Galilee? Well, various reasons could be assigned. I would say, number one, the inhabitants of Galilee would be more receptive to, quote, novel, unquote, teaching. It's as orthodox as they come. It's from the mouth of God in the flesh himself. But it's novel in first century Judaism. The people are going to be more receptive. Secondly, it just manifests the heart and attitude of God, that God often gives his word to the outcasts. That the true word is often hidden from the eyes of established religious authority. This was the case in Jesus' earthly ministry. He found the lack of receptivity in Jerusalem to be appalling. So much so, he wept over the city. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that stonest the prophets, killest them that are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered you together as a mother hen her chickens, but ye would not." He found it appalling, but not necessarily surprising, knowing how entrenched religious tradition and authority can become. So much so that God in the flesh, could not break the superstition. It's no wonder today that we can't do anything about religious authority. God in the flesh, who had given the law, who was the Lord God of heaven, couldn't break the tradition, couldn't break the superstition of the people. So I think it's just a manifestation of the heart and attitude of God that he gives his word to the needy, to those who need it. He said, "I have not come to call the righteous to repentance." And by righteous he means the scribes and Pharisees who said they were righteous and didn't have need of a Savior. I've not come to call them. The sick need a physician, not the whole. And he means that in a metaphorical sense. Obviously, you can't use it as a proof text for medical science. The whole context is forgiveness of sins there and not divine healing in Matthew chapter 9. The sick need a physician. And who are the sick? Galileans. Galileans. Because of their contact. Because of their contact with Gentiles, because that's what the rabbis thought of them as sick people up there. And there were ones who had just enough breaking with tradition to be receptive to his message. And thirdly, I think we're on, Galilee was less dangerous. Galilee was less dangerous. Look at some scriptures with me, if you will. John chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. Less dangerous for anyone who wants to teach novel theology. You just couldn't get away with it in Judea or Jerusalem. John 4, verses 1 to 3. When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, when they knew this, they didn't like John. He had called them vipers, and Jesus will end up calling them that later on. But John's already called them that. Who warns you vipers to flee from the wrath to come? And now they find out we've got a greater menace and threat to deal with than John, Jesus. He's making and baptizing more disciples than John. Then look at verse 3. Jesus left Judea. Now that proves he was down there, but it was temporary. It was an excursion there. He left Judea and returned into Galilee. Departed again into Galilee. Why? Because of the danger involved. It was safer to teach in Galilee than it was in Judea. And we've got other references. Let's see. 45. This chapter, at least 4 times, I think, it seems to be stressing the thought of leaving Judea, returning to Galilee. 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 It says it 4 times here.
So the continue.
It says it 4 times here. When he was come into Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things that he did at Jerusalem at the feast. For they also went into the feast, which proves the Galileans went down there. They're orthodox in that regard. Peter was down there before Jesus came on the scene. To be sure, he was down there at the festival seasons. Then in verse 47, when this nobleman had heard that Jesus was come out of Judea into Galilee, he went unto him. And then for the 4th time in the last verse, this is again the second miracle that Jesus did when he was come out of Judea into Galilee. John's stressing that because John, if you don't know, is the only gospel writer that places Jesus in Galilee in Judea more often than in Galilee in his gospel. And that's unlike the other 3 gospel writers. But he doesn't want us to get the wrong impression by that. He wants us to understand that Jesus' teaching in Judea was temporary. They were excursions there. They were basically around the festival seasons so that the audience would be larger. And he always made haste back to Galilee whenever things were rough because his time was not yet come. And then I think we have another reference over in chapter 7 and verse 1, which specifically talks about the feast time. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry. Now that just means in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill him. John 7 and verse 1. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee. He would not walk in Judea or Jerusalem, because the Jews sought to kill him. And then he ends up down there at what? A feast, a festival season, the Feast of Tabernacles, because his audience would be larger. And he could draw on people that were not from Galilee, who could possibly be pilgrims from all over the world coming for these various festival times. So John is the gospel writer that places Jesus in Judea more than Galilee. Most of the time when you're reading John's gospel, you're talking about, you can just think in your mind, you can picture Jerusalem and Judea, southern Israel. This is where Jesus is. The other gospel writers, if you're reading them, most of the time you can assume he's up in Galilee. As a matter of fact, the other gospel writers basically, with a few exceptions, like the one we just saw in Matthew 4, that he returned to Galilee. That means he wasn't there to begin with. He must have been down in Judea. But the other gospel writers basically only touch on the southern section when they proceed to tell us of his final trip, which includes Passion Week, which includes the crucifixion. For example, I'll just give you these references and then we'll go on. Matthew 19:1, Matthew 20, verses 17 and 29, and Matthew 21 and verse 1. I gave those to you when we looked at Samaria, how he would travel on different occasions. He'd go across, he'd go beyond Jordan on the other side, or through Samaria, or along the border of Samaria and Galilee, or whatever. You say, what are those scriptures for? I need a note so I know I've got them down. I'm saying that the other gospel writers generally place him in Judea only at the conclusion of their books. The end of Matthew, the end of Mark, the end of Luke, with a few exceptions, which are excursions, which are not dealt with in nearly as much detail as they are in John's Gospel. So we see several different reasons why Jesus would spend his time and ministry in Galilee. He did not go to religious headquarters and camp out there as we might think logically should be done. He made trips there and then he'd leave, and trips back and then he'd leave, and another trip there and then he would leave, off and on at great festival times where he knew that he could have a large audience to speak with. But most of the time was spent up in Galilee, and he drew his disciples basically from Galilee. Now let me say some other things about Galilee. We're just giving you one example of many that show the importance of knowing something about the Judaism that lies behind the New Testament documents. Because of the extreme racial, ethnic emphases of the rabbis, the Galileans are looked down on as proven actually in the New Testament in places like John chapter 1, verses 43 through 46. John 1, verses 43 through 46. Here you have the case of Jesus calling a couple of his disciples up in Galilee, Simon Peter and Andrew, his brother. And he also calls Philip. Now, we're told in verse 44 that Philip was of the same city, Bethsaida, as Andrew and Peter. And Philip finds Nathanael. We're not told here where Nathanael is from. But obviously he's not in favor with these thoughts of any prominence or worthiness ascribed to Galilee. Philip findeth Nathanael, and saith unto him, We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Manifests a typical attitude that people from the South, or people who have been plugged into and influenced by the thoughts of the South, would have toward this northern region of Galilee. The Galileans couldn't even pronounce some of their words correctly. Certain gutturals were difficult for them because of Gentile contact. We have differences of speech in different regions here in the United States. You're influenced by the people that you're around. Your speech patterns are picked up by the people that you hear all the time, unless you just plug your ears and just talk to yourself or something. You know, any child, you could have an American child, take them from the womb and take them to Timbuktu and they'd learn the language. You know, they're going to learn whatever's around them. And so the New Testament even lets us know this, that the Galileans were in this regard so different than the people of the South. They didn't even speak the same. They couldn't pronounce some of their words, quote correctly, unquote. That is, they couldn't pronounce them as the people of the South did. And this was certainly true with particular gutturals. Let me show you proof of that. Matthew 26 and verse 73. Jesus has been arrested, and he's before one of the leaders, one of his several trials, and Peter has followed just close enough to see what's going on, just far enough to be safe, he thinks. And after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. Or we could say, betrayeth thee. Thy speech betrayeth thee. Why, we're down in Jerusalem now. These are people who live in Jerusalem, and they've listened to Peter talk. Now, he talks Aramaic, Hebrew, whatever's being spoken here. He talks the same language, but he doesn't pronounce the words the same way. And not just he doesn't pronounce them the same way, they're so distinctive, certain guttural sounds, they're so distinctive they know immediately that he's from Galilee. And there's nothing he can say about it, because the more he talks, the more he proves it. Thy speech bewrayeth thee. Thy speech betrayeth thee. And we find this also in Mark chapter 14 and verse 70. So I'll mention those quotes again. Judea is grain, Galilee straw, beyond Jordan is chaff. If one wishes to be rich, let him go north. If he wants to be wise, let him come south. And let's turn back to Matthew 4, and I want to finish reading that passage we started with here earlier. When Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the seacoast, and the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali. Notice, not the land of Benjamin, the land of Judah. Those are southern tribes there. The land of Zebulun and of Naphtali, northern despised tribes, those overrun first by the Assyrians, those occupied by Gentiles, by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, that is to the north. Capernaum is up to the north. Galilee of the Gentiles, that part of Galilee the rabbis essentially said belongs to the Gentiles. The people which sat in darkness saw great light, and to them which sat in the region and shadow of death light is sprung up. From that time Jesus began to preach and to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And Jesus, walking by the Dead Sea, that's down south, no, by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said unto them, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. They went from fishermen to fishers of men. There is a difference. From fishermen to fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him. And going on thence, he finds, two others. And immediately they left the ship and their father and followed him. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people. And his fame went throughout all Syria. Well, the rabbis would say, yeah, any heretic could be famous in Syria. And they brought unto him all sick people. Syria, that means Tyre and Zidon, that were taken with divers diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with demons, and those which were lunatic, struck by the moon. Moonstruck is what it literally means. And those that had the palsy, and he healed them. And there followed him great multitudes of people from Galilee and from Decapolis. And now we're going down south here. This is as a surprise, and Matthew gives us this as a prelude to where his gospel is going, and from Jerusalem, and from Judea, and from beyond Jordan. So the Galileans are prime candidates for the message of the Messiah because they have chosen to reject much of the rabbinical traditions and notions of the scribes. So, secondly tonight, and that'll bring us right into our second point, let's discuss what appears only one time in Scripture in a very enigmatic, mysterious passage. That's the subject of Corban. Corban. We'll see if we can't give you enough of an understanding on this that we won't ever have to come back and discuss Corban. For this, I'd like to start in, Mark 7. Matthew 15 will have it in Matthew's account, but Matthew 15, or Matthew doesn't use the word. He translates the word. Mark uses the word and then translates it. Mark chapter 7, verses 9 through 13. Matthew gives the same account in Matthew 15, verses 3 through 6. Mark 7, verses 9 through 13. We're talking earlier about the Galileans rejecting some of the notions of the scribes, and the elders. Well, here is one of those teachings of theirs. It's known as the teaching of Corban. Corban, or it can be spelled with a K. Just depends on how you're going to transliterate with C's or K's. K may be better because it's a hard C sound, which is a K sound, but most of the time you see it spelled with a C. And in these chapters, both of these, Matthew 15, Mark 7, which are exactly the same, I mean, they're an account of the exact same event, the whole context is religious tradition and the teaching of the elders. The background in Mark 7 is that the disciples have forgotten to wash themselves in a way befitting them before a meal according to the Pharisees. And so they have asked Jesus why. Verse 5, "Why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands?" So there's one thing you could discuss, is their tradition about washings, ceremonial washings, which we're not going to do. "He answered and said unto them, Well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites." So Isaiah happens to be a source in both of these, Galilee and Corban. "As it is written, This people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." Which is basically a description of what a hypocrite is. He said that you're a hypocrite. He's prophesied of you hypocrites. And then if you want a definition of a hypocrite, here it is, one who says and doesn't do. "These people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me." Now, do you believe you can worship God and it be in vain? That you can worship God and it be in vain. That is, to no profit at all. That is, it's emptiness, without meaning, without any eternal or even temporary consequence as far as the courts of heaven are concerned. Well, that's where the denominational system is today. They are worshiping God in vain. We've never said they're not worshiping. They're using maybe some songs that we've used here, but it's in vain, though. "Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of elders as the washing of pots and cups. And he said to them, Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition." And he's going to give them an example. So what we would have here, if we were writing in English today, we would say, for example, Moses said, and he quotes two places in the law, Exodus chapters 20 and 21. Moses said, "Honor thy father and thy mother." Okay, that's the fifth commandment. You remember that? The fifth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, Exodus 20 and verse 12, that it may be well with thee and you'll have long life in the land which the Lord thy God giveth to thee. And Paul quotes that, or the promise of it, over in Ephesians 6, showing that some part of it has to be still applicable. "Full well ye reject God's commandment." And what was that? "Honor thy father and thy mother." And Exodus 21:17, "Whoso curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, If a man shall say to his father or mother, It is Corban, that is to say, a gift by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free." Little wonder I say it's an enigmatic scripture here. What does that mean? "It is Corban, that is to say, a gift by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. And ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of God of none effect." Well, let's get into this issue here. This word Corban, C-O-R-B-A-N, is a transliteration from the Hebrew through the Greek to the English. It's just a transliteration, in other words. The Greek of Mark just transliterates the Hebrew, and our English C-O-R-B-A-N is simply a transliteration of the Greek. In other words, it's not a translation. In other words, Corban tells you nothing. Corban's a Hebrew word. It appears in the Old Testament over and over again, especially in Leviticus, Numbers, and the book of Ezekiel. The word Corban appears many times in Leviticus, Numbers, and Ezekiel especially. I mean, it appears other places, but those are the dominant books, Leviticus, Numbers, and Ezekiel. But it's a Hebrew term, Corban. So you know what transliterations are. If it's transliterated and it hasn't become a technical term for you to know, like angel is simply a transliteration. but you already know what it means, so it has become a word to you. But Corban, you probably don't know what it means. It's just a transliteration. What does it mean? It's a Hebrew term. It doesn't do any good in Greek, doesn't do any good in English. You have to know what it means. Well, it's the general term, or a general term, for some type of offering in the Old Testament. The same word, but with a suffix attached, occurs in Matthew 27 and verse 6, and it's translated treasury. Whenever Judas said to himself that I have sinned and betrayed an innocent man, and he went into the chief priest and cast the money at them and left and went out and hanged himself, then the religious leaders said it's not lawful for us to take the money of blood and put it in the treasury. It's a fine time to get legal and technical. I mean, the people that broke all the laws in the trials and execution of Christ, they said, well, it's not lawful to take the money of murder, of blood, and put it in the treasury. It's really the same term, or let's say it another way. It comes from the same root as what we have here in Mark 7 and verse 11. It simply has an as suffix on it. So what does the word mean? The word means gift or an offering. Mark knows he's writing to people who wouldn't understand that, so he goes on to give us the interpretation of the word. Look at verse 11 real carefully. It is Corban. Now, this phrase, that is to say a gift, shouldn't be in red. Jesus didn't say that. I mean, he's talking to the rabbis, to the leaders. They know what Corban is. He doesn't have to say, now let me give you the interpretation of the word since you don't understand Hebrew. Okay, so this is Mark writing the account. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mark is explaining to his readers, the readers of his gospel, what the word Corban meant. They obviously were not Jewish readers. Jesus would not have to go on and give us a parenthetical explanation to the rabbis of what the term Corban meant. So this is one of, and you've got several like this, mistakes in the KJV where the translators either weren't careful or just didn't know, didn't think. They didn't know whether or not what was being recorded came from Jesus or was a later gloss or explanation. And you have a problem with this over in Acts chapter 1, I know, where it's difficult to tell who's talking. Is it the Apostle Peter standing up with the 120 saying, men and brethren, giving them the account, or is it Luke recording that this is the meaning of what the Apostle Peter was saying, which is what I think is true. Well, that's the case here. It is Corban. Then Jesus said, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. And Mark sticks in, that is to say, a gift. Now, Matthew's account, Matthew doesn't even give the word Corban. He simply gives the term gift. That's Matthew chapter 15, verses 3 through 6. All right. So that's what the word means. Mark interprets it for us, and Matthew just gives us the term gift in Matthew 15 and verse 5. I mean, that's what the word means, but you've got another Greek word that you would give if you're trying to give a Greek translation of the Hebrew. You wouldn't give the Hebrew. In other words, Mark has two words for gift. He's got one Hebrew and one Greek. And Matthew simply has a Greek. But what Jesus said in Matthew 15:5 was, of course, the Hebrew term Corban. So that's what the word means. What's Jesus trying to say in his teaching on Corban? Well, here's what it's all about. And it's purely a Judaistic background here, that if you don't know that, you don't know anything about it. What he's getting at is a Judaistic perversion of Deuteronomy 23:21. Of Deuteronomy 23:21, and a neglect of the fifth commandment. He's really dealing with two things here. A perversion of Deuteronomy 23:21, which is the teaching on the oath. Moses said, if a man will vow a vow unto the Lord, then he'll not be slack to pay it. For the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee if you don't pay it. So he's talking about vowing a vow unto the Lord God. Deuteronomy 23:21. And a neglect of the fifth commandment. That's Exodus 20 and verse 12. honor thy father and thy mother. And the teaching against speaking back to one's parents. Exodus 21:17, which is also found in Leviticus 20 and verse 9, which reads like this in both places. Mark 7:10, whoso curseth or revileth, speaketh back angrily to one's father or mother, let him die the death. And the Jewish form of death was by stoning. So Moses taught the vow that if you vow a vow, you can't break it. The Lord will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee. That is, sin in thee if you broke it. Moses also taught high respect and regard for one's parents. What the Jews have done with all of this, you're going to find this interesting, is a very neat perversion of it, twisting of it, rearranging of it to meet their own ends, and you'll find this to be interesting, to meet their own financial ends, greed and covetousness. Here's the situation that the Jews taught. If a young man had a father and a mother who were perhaps getting older, and who, according to the typical Jewish understanding of the law, would be in later life dependent upon that son for their sustenance and support when they got beyond the age of means, then if that son desired to be out from under that responsibility, then he could pronounce all of the possessions he had as Corban. He would go through a ceremony before the rabbis and say, my possessions are Corban, C-O-R-B-A-N. That is a gift, an offering. That is a gift or offering to the Lord. And then he could return to his parents, look at the end of verse 11, and say to them, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, anything that I could do for you, or that I have, or that I own, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, I'm sorry, it's all Corban. Okay, see, it's a technical matter here that he's talking about. And he brings out one instance here among many. And at that point, he would be free because of the technical use of the term Corban, which had become an important word for the rabbis in this type of ceremony. He would be free from financial obligations and responsibility to his parents. You say, but wait a minute, he said Corban, so that made it a gift. He had to give it to God. But if he would use the term Corban, he could say it was a gift and never have to surrender it. Now the rabbis, though, had something in the background. They had hopes that since now the money need only be spread among one family rather than two, that the extra money left over would eventually find its way into their own pockets. You see, if the man didn't say Corban, then according to Old Testament law, thou shalt honor thy father and mother. Father and mother get beyond the years of providing means for themselves, then the son's income had to take care of the son's family and their family. Well, you wouldn't have anything left to give to God or to the rabbis would think. And so they devised this way of the man being able to say, Corban, Corban, Corban. And then when his parents came to him, he could say to them, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, it's Corban, so I'm sorry. And the ending there, he shall be free. That is, he shall be free from a financial obligation to his parents. Well, I trust you can see how unscriptural that is. That's such a legalistic perversion of the spirit as well as the letter of the law. Jesus said, the law said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever curses father or mother, let him die the death. Well, this is, in a sense, cursing father and mother, to leave them to their own, to neglect and misery and poverty in old age. That's a cursing of father and mother. He said, that's what the law said. But ye say, if a man say to his father and mother, it's Corban. That is, all my possessions are Corban. They're dedicated, they're devoted. It's a gift or offering to the Lord. then by whatever you may have been profited by me, it's no longer available to you now, and therefore he shall be free. Verse 12, and ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father and his mother. It was a saying among the religious leaders, and I quote, it is hard for the parents, but the law is clear, meaning Deuteronomy 23:21, vows must be kept. See, they wanted to major on Deuteronomy 21:23, that if you make a vow, you cannot break it. They wanted to major on that to the neglect of the passages Jesus brought forth and quoted, Exodus 20:12 and Exodus 21:17. So it's a misrepresentation of the Old Testament law. Jesus quotes the passages that are applicable here. They quoted another, Deuteronomy 23:21. So it was a saying of theirs. I'll give that to you again. It is hard for the parents. We realize that it's hard for the parents, but the law is clear. Vows must be kept. That's how heartless and ruthless these men were. We were talking Wednesday night about speaking the truth. If you just understood how perverted and heartless and ruthless and deceived and deceiving these religious leaders were, you wouldn't feel sorry for them at all. They've dug their own grave. They've dug their own way into hell. They deserve what they're getting. Jesus said, you deserve the damnation of hell. When they went around with their little tiptoeing through the Old Testament law, fancy rearrangement of everything, hoping that now that money will only have to cover one family instead of two, an old man and an old lady, we can do without them. And the Jews typically had high regard for their elders. I mean, that's just part of Middle Eastern custom. So it is horrendous to find the rabbis rearranging things, hoping that that money that did cover two families, or possibly would cover two families, would now only cover one, and perhaps the extra left over at the end could trickle down into their own pockets. Josephus even uses this word in his Wars 2:9-4. After this, Pilate raised another disturbance by expending that sacred treasure which is called Corban upon aqueducts. That's Wars of the Jews 2:9-4. Pilate used the Corban, which was a certain money that had been saved in the treasury there. You see, some of the men would surrender part of that, but it would never have to be surrendered, or they were pretty much guaranteed that all of it wouldn't be spent. There was a Corban in the treasury, in the temple. And then I'd just like to conclude with this last verse here in Mark 7 and verse 13. Jesus went on to say, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye had delivered. And look at this, same as the end of verse 8. And here's why I don't apologize for stopping with a couple of examples, because he did. And many such like things do ye. Now don't forget that verse right there. The end of it is the same as the end of verse 8. And many other such like things do ye. Now when Jesus said many, he means many. Can you imagine how long we could spend if we wanted to research all of these many other like things? Well, why do it when he said they're like things? If you've studied Galilee, Corban, you know something about the washing of pots and pans, you know it all. If you know the definition we've given you of Judaism, you know it all. If you know that binding legality that they approached everything with, you know it all. So I really like this, that he said many such like things do ye. So I'm going to stop with just two of those many examples, Galilee and Corban.